Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, wherever you are in the world today. My name's Paul Webb, I'm the founder of B2B Energy, and you are listening to Energy Speaks Back. Energy Speaks Back interviews energy experts from around the world. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening, and welcome to episode 19 of Energy Speaks Back. Weekly, I present to you experts from around the world, and today we are back in the UK. Our subject today is data, and we cannot manage what we do not measure. Our purpose, as always, is to provide good understanding of energy management knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. Today, I'm joined by someone who is a hidden hero. He is renowned for his services of Degree Day. He's written many books on the subject, and not only is he a certified energy manager, he's also a certified measurement and verification professional. I'm actually very proud to have him as my guest today. So, without any further ado, I give you Vilnis Vesma. Good afternoon, Vilnis, and how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Paul.
Right, and it is a real honour to have you on this podcast today. I've actually known you for many, many years. I've used your energy data, your Degree Day. Well, in fact, we started off earlier when we was talking. I wanted to call you Vilnis Degree Day Vesma, and I'm sure there's a story that will come out of that later. So, Vilnis, I only know of you as that person from my data collection. Can you please, I'd love to know more about you, and I'm sure the audience would love to know more about you. So can you give us some background about yourself?
Right, background. So I did a degree originally in engineering, science and economics and I was sponsored by the nationalised electricity supply industry. And a degree in engineering and economics was perhaps not ideal for somebody who was majoring on technical work. And it was 10 years probably before the economics part of it gave me any benefit. But when it did, it really kicked in and paid off. So I worked for a few years in the electricity supply industry, mainly doing research projects on power stations, nice hands-on stuff. But I felt I never really got on as well as I would have liked with it, and eventually I felt I'd just been rumbled as being technically too weak to get anywhere. And then somebody in my office got a 40-year service certificate, and I thought, that's not for me, I'm off. So I left and went to fly a desk in London. I worked for the Design Council for a couple of years as an education officer, and from there to what is now the Energy Institute. In those days, it was known as the Institute of Energy, and I was Deputy Secretary and Education Officer there. And there I got into conversation with people whose job was saving energy rather than generating and distributing it. And I found it fascinating. Now, one of my jobs as Deputy Secretary was to clear out the basement when we needed more space for a growing membership department. And so down I went. And what I found was rooms absolutely stuffed with textbooks of all sorts. And what had happened was they'd actually closed their library to make room for the membership department originally, and they just piled it all into the cellar. This stuff was absolutely priceless. One of my top favorites of the lot was a huge book called The Efficient Use of Steam, written by Sir Oliver Lisle, as he later became. He was an advisor to the Ministry of Fuel and Power during the Second World War. He was managing director of the sugar refinery which bore his name in London. And he was the country's first effective energy manager.
Wow.
And he wrote down everything he knew in this hardback book, which runs to 900 and something pages.
And how many times have you read that book now, Vilnis?
I have to confess, I have not read it all, but I've read enough of it to pick out some real nuggets. The great
Right.
thing about Oliver Lyle was that he knew his stuff.
Yeah.
So he's got everything in there, from thermodynamics through to regression analysis, statistics, engineering, chemistry, you name it. He knows about it. He writes about it in a quite accessible way, which is sort of mixed with a little light humor as well.
All right.
And there's one particular paragraph in it which I can't put my hands on immediately, but I can pretty well remember what it says.
Yeah.
He's talking about analyzing the performance of the refinery, and he's interested in how much coke it takes to make a ton of sugar. And he knows that actually there's no such thing as simple what we would call kilowatt hours per ton these days, or in his time it was tons of coke per pound of sugar.
Yeah.
He actually does what I think is the first time that anybody does a straight line regression analysis of consumption versus output. And he remarks that the performance of the refinery is always better in weeks when it's been bombed. And he says, how can this be? The opposite would seem to be the natural conclusion. He says, I can only conclude that in weeks when the factory had been bombed, people were too busy clearing up the mess to take proper meter readings. And, let's just let that sink in for a moment. This is the managing director of a major food factory in the middle of a war, and he is as concerned about reading his meters as he is about clearing up damage from bombing of the factory.
Right.
And you have to ask why.
Yeah.
Have you got any idea, Paul? Why would you think it was so important to him to save energy?
Well, because it was a cost, wasn't it? Energy was the cost to actually generate that sugar. So it was important for him to, and I think you alluded to something earlier about the rarity of the coal at that time as well, was it?
Actually, that was the main driving factor for him, was the fact that if he didn't husband his resources carefully and ran out of fuel, it wasn't coming through a pipe under the yard.
Yeah.
The yard was piled with solid fuel, coke.
Yeah.
And if he ran out, he'd have to shut the refinery. So it was a mission. Energy management, or fuel economy as he would have called it, was mission critical to what he did. And I worked for a while later on in my career for a company called NIFES, National Industrial Fuel Efficiency Service, was its full name. And they were actually founded during the Second World War as part of the Ministry of Fuel and Power, and privatized in the early 1950s. And in their heyday, they had over 1,000 fuel technologists out on the road helping companies to save fuel. When since have we ever seen such serious activity on energy saving on such a scale as was seen at that time? I would argue we've never actually seen the like of it. But us old blokes always like to hark back to a golden age, don't we?
Yeah,
anyway, we do. Where was I? Oh yeah, I was working through my career. So I've got as far as the Energy Institute, and one of my committee chairmen that I looked after, a chap called Mike Horsley, was running a training program at Portsmouth Polytechnic, as it then was, and it was run by an outfit, or it was funded by an outfit called the Manpower Services Commission. We're talking about 1981 or thereabouts. And it was a 5-month full-time residential course for unemployed people who wanted to become energy managers. Again, that's something you don't see much anymore. And he said, you should come on my course. He said, the trouble is, it is for unemployed people and you've got a job. So that's a bit of a problem. So I went to the boss, who I wasn't keen on anyway. I rendered myself unemployed and applied to go on the course. I didn't get the place. I didn't get the place because on the day of the interview, this chap Mike had invited me to accompany him on an Energy Institute related visit up to Leeds. So I actually missed the interview and disqualified myself. Anyway, it had a happy ending. I did eventually get onto a waiting list and get the place on the course. And I came off it. And Monday morning of the day, my first day back in circulation, I had a job offer from Lambeth Borough Council. So that was my first job as an energy manager, and I was their first energy manager, and spent 2 years with them, 2 years with Gloucestershire County Council. So fast forward, it's now 1985 when I go to work for Gloucestershire. Personal computers have recently become things that existed, hitherto unknown. And energy managers were among the first people in local authorities to actually get access to an individual computer. And I had met one of my opposite numbers, a chap called Colin Ashford, that's right, from Hackney Council. He was a computer fanatic. He invited me over to his house and he showed me one of these desktop computers. And he said, this is the future. Look, it's got a program called a spreadsheet, and it's got a program called a database. And it's got a program called a word processor, which you can use yourself rather than sending stuff up to the typing pool. So it's brilliant. You need to get one of these. So I went out and bought myself an Apple IIe. It had about the power of a wristwatch. And this was in 1983, I think, that I got that. Yeah. I installed this at home, and here's a reflection for historical perspective. That computer and a couple of added bits and pieces and software to make it work like, half decently, cost £3,500. And the year before, the flat that I was living in London, I had bought for £14,500. So London flat, £14,500, personal computer, £3,500. It was a big investment. It was so big that I registered myself for value added tax as a self-employed person, even though I had a job, to claim back the VAT, and just made it my business to understand how to use them. So ending up at Gloucestershire, using a desktop computer to support me in my work as an energy manager, using spreadsheets, which were accounting tools, as a technical calculation tool. And again, itchy feet, opportunity came up for me to do some lectures on how to use a computer in energy management. But to do that, I needed to equip myself with, a van full of computers to take around the country to set up in hotel rooms. So again, trip to the boss's office, rendered myself unemployed, trip to the bank, borrow the money for some computers to put in the back of a van, and a phone call to the person who'd suggested I do these training courses, a chap called Andrew Buckley, who is still around in the energy business today, and another formative character in my career. Andrew, I'm ready to go. My first year of self-employment, a third of my turnover was doing mobile computer training courses for energy managers. Yeah. I even wrote a book on it, which he published.
Excellent.
It's called Managing Energy with a Desktop Computer.
And are these books still available now?
Fortunately not. This book that I wrote confidently predicts that the 3.5-inch floppy disk will never get wide acceptance, and that Windows is only a passing fad.
This is where you took that one off the market then.
Yeah, so definitely just as well.
You have to revise it. I think, Vilnis, you need to revise the book and publish it on Amazon. Sure, there's some value in it somewhere.
I think things have moved beyond the days when an energy manager or self-employed consultant could, within a couple of weeks, teach him or herself everything there is to know about computing and actually go out and start selling software. And, you know, there are a couple of us. I'm thinking of there's somebody still on the scene, a chap called Niall Enright, who used to work for March Consulting.
He's contacted me recently. He's written a book as well, hasn't he? About
he has, yeah.
He comes onto my LinkedIn quite a lot,
yeah. Well, he's written a massive tome on energy management. I've written a 200-page paperback.
Same here. I've authored How to Become an Energy Expert, which don't go nowhere near those books, I'm sure.
Yeah, but people like Niall and I and Julian Edmonds, who worked for an energy management consultancy whose name just escapes me at the moment. But yeah, we were all spanning the software and energy management domains. That was, again, you know, old bloke harking back to the golden era. Yeah. They were great times because you could invent good stuff. It was simple.
Get how far are we away from degree day?
Right, so we are not far off now, because by this time, part of what I'm doing and selling with spreadsheet-based solutions is analysis software that helps people to do QSUM analysis using degree day based models for building heating monitoring. It's 1991, I think, or thereabouts. The government has, since the 1960s, been publishing monthly degree day statistics free of charge. So it's got a long pedigree, this stuff. But the Thatcher government, bless them, decided they'd save money by privatizing various things left, right, and centre. One of the things they privatized is the Met Office. And the Met Office had, up until that moment, been providing the weather data to the Department of Energy, or whatever it was called in those days, to provide free public degree day statistics. And they stopped the free supply. And they put the price up to £100,000 a year or something. And there was this civil servant at the Department of Energy, a chap called Alan Franklin, who bravely held his ground, called their bluff and said, no, we're not going to pay for it. Long and short of it was, the supply of free degree day data was cut off. And a handful of us in the business complained vociferously, had a letter read on the BBC Today programme saying how outrageous it was that this vital information had been withdrawn. Well, nothing much happened about it, except that a few months later, the government capitulated and decided they should start supplying free degree day data again. But unfortunately, the world had moved on, and they were now obliged to put the business out to competitive tender. And this chap, Alan Franklin, he was a bit stuck because he only knew about the Met Office. That was the only supplier he could think of. So he started doing some research, and he came across this chap, it's actually me, who by then was manufacturing and selling measure them yourselves degree day equipment, which could go into factories particularly and local government, and would connect to your PC and enable you to do your own weekly and monthly degree day statistics, heating and cooling for your own local area. And he mistakenly thought that I must have sold hundreds of them and the country would be peppered with these potential independent observing stations. He didn't know that I only sold 12 and half of them were in London, but it didn't matter because I found myself miraculously on the tender list to supply the free degree day service for the UK.
Yeah.
So off I went, prepared a tender in conjunction with Peter Harris, this chap who taught me about QSUM analysis, with whom I'd become good friends. Unfortunately, I overcooked the offering by lumping in loads of extras, and long and short of it was, not a competitive price, didn't get the contract. So there I was, left stuck with a supply infrastructure, because I'd recruited some people to act as weather observers for me around the country, but I had no customers. So I thought, oh dear. And then I thought, well, I'll tell you what, why don't I just write to all my observers and say, we're on. We're just going to start our own parallel degree day reporting service. So that's what I did. I had my 18 regional observers. They supplied me with monthly statistics by post, if you can imagine that, stuff coming in letters with stamps on.
Yeah.
And once a month, I'd hand crank through a spreadsheet, the degree day figures for the 18 regions, and supply them just on a monthly basis on subscription to customers that needed it. Fortunately, it didn't take many customers to break even. I think it was two subscribers, and I was breaking even on what I was paying my observers. And then, ka-ching, what I discovered was that the Met Office, who had got the contract to supply the Department of Energy with degree day data, had put constraints on it and said that they weren't allowed to do anything other than publish it in their own publications. They could not, for example, provide it to journals and so forth that in previous years had the free data. So quick as a flash, I wrote to all the editors that I knew and said, look, as long as the Met Office is playing dog in the manger with this data, I will supply you free of charge with degree day statistics to put in your magazine so that your readers can once again get the free data that they want. And that was how I became the original Mr. Degree Days.
Yeah.
Because
so just and I wasn't too sure of this. So the data that you provide is from your own systems.
Oh yes, yeah.
I didn't know that.
No, I had to be scrupulous about that. I couldn't just tap into Met Office data for copyright reasons. So I therefore had to find independent observers whose results were comparable with the previously published data from the Met Office. It was a real hurdle to get over. Because, well, basically the specification was for an unachievable level of accuracy. And the accuracy was determined by the extent to which any bidder's data matched the Met Office's data, except that the Met Office were one of the bidders.
Right.
So by definition, they were bound to be accurate.
Right.
I did, with the help of my father-in-law, who's one of our non-execs here at the business still to this day, we managed to change the terms of the specification such that we only had to agree within a certain number of degree days, 95% of the time, with the historical data in order to pass the test, which was good for anybody who was trying to bid with reasonably solid raw data. And there was one other company in the frame by that stage. And once we'd got the specification terms sorted out, we sailed home.
Yeah.
We actually winkled out the Met Office, dislodged them from their position as supplier, and we became the supplier of the data to the government for its free degree day service. And we kept that contract for about 7 years or so.
Right.
Including, you're going to love this, one memorable occasion when we put in our bid, and I got a phone call from, by then it was somebody at the Carbon Trust who'd taken over the management of the contract.
Yeah.
and they said, well, you've won the contract. Do you want any feedback? And I thought, well, that's strange. Normally it's, you didn't win the contract. Do you want any feedback? So I was intrigued by this. I said, well, yes, of course. I mean, I'd be fascinated to know. And he said, well, actually, you weren't the cheapest bidder. The Met Office was cheaper than you, and somebody else came in offering it free of charge. And they said, what do you think about that? And I said, well, the one offering it free of charge, there has to be a catch. And I said, I'm surprised that the Met Office didn't get it being cheaper. And he said, well, there's a simple reason for that. He said, in the 7 years that you've been doing it, we've had a level of service that they were never able to match when they were incumbents.
Right.
And that had been one of the very, very important things, as I hope anybody would know that I've worked for. Quality of service is critical. Yeah. So it's a question of going the extra mile to make sure you deliver what you've promised. If you foul up, fess up straight away, put it right, pay attention to what the customer wants and make sure that that's what they get.
To be honest, is this only in the UK that you're providing this data for, or is it across the world?
It's settled back to being just a predominantly UK service, but there was a long spell when I was providing data for multinationals who wanted it for their outposts in other parts of the world as well.
So you've given them the system to do that, was you?
Yeah, they would subscribe to the data. And the reason my colleague Daniel Curtis is on board is that he helped me he was brought on board basically to help me improve the back office systems beyond the kind of legacy 1990s homemade software that was running it before. And so we sourced international raw data, process it, and then publish it for those who need it. But he's taken that over now. I don't do supply of degree days anymore.
Let me take you back. I know you've got towards the end of your story as such, but let me take you back I want to pick up on some points. So Second World War, we've got the sugar manufacturing, and this business owner is really critically managing his third largest expense. Then we've got some other times where you've mentioned where people are critically managing their energy. What's happened since then? Because we're not seeing that. We're not seeing organizations really managing their energy to that degree of what we had in the Second World War. What's changed?
We're not. What's changed is the focus on carbon emissions. Now, I'm not saying that the focus on carbon emissions is wrong, far from it. I've known since the 1960s that there was a problem with global warming, because I can remember running away to look up what albedo meant when I heard it mentioned on a television program about what polar ice caps melting. Yeah. What's changed is that the government's focus has now become exclusively on emissions reporting. So it's one step removed from the technical business of saving energy, and it's one step removed in terms of how actively you think about the work. It's a passive thing, and it's about accounting. Well, I'm being slightly unfair and exaggerating, but the big picture for me is the public perception is now the main thing is carbon emissions, which are an environmental issue. So therefore, people now think environment, which is fine. But in corporate terms, that means you give the job to your environmental compliance or management person. And that person, again, simplifying, is highly unlikely to have technical skills or the focus and influence to deal with the low-level technical things that really need to be done to achieve those reduced emissions. So the government has inadvertently, I think, de-skilled companies and public sector organizations. I have to say, with many honourable exceptions. And those are the people that I like working for, the people who realise that the way to salvation is not through preaching the evils of global warming. It is through fixing and improving stuff so that it does not use as much energy as it used to. And that's, energy through thick and thin has always been my focus since I became an energy consultant back in, I dread to say it, 1987. That has been my single blinkered sort of driving principle: use less fuel and energy.
Yeah. And so from my approach, it's gas, electricity, and water. I always incorporate water. The government and the latest lots of legislation are incorporating the transport side. So as a ESOS lead assessor, for instance, in the UK, we have to report on all of those: gas, electricity, not water. So gas, electricity, and the transport have come into that. And I get that. But our expertise as an energy expert is predominantly the gas and electricity management.
That's true. I get that entirely. And I was very late to the party when it comes to transport and fleet energy management. And to be honest, that's not entirely a surprise, because for the vast majority of my clients, it's a minority interest. And if it's a majority interest, it's because that's what you're doing all the time. Moreover, if you're operating a heavy commercial vehicle fleet, your suppliers are falling over themselves to sell you stuff that's more fuel efficient than what you had before, and to give you systems that enable you to monitor your fuel economy, to train your drivers to reduce your fuel consumption, to improve the amount of life you get out of tires. It's astonishing to think that under the right conditions, the tire on a heavy goods vehicle will run for 400,000 miles, a single tire, maybe with one regrooving. That is the kind of world that transport people live in. But now everybody needs to think about it. It's good. And for me, it's not a major dislocation, because although I obviously have some experience as an energy manager, so I'm reasonably proficient in building energy management. I've worked as a consultant for people in various kinds of industries, so I got a reasonable grasp of some of the other technical solutions as well. But my strength really is in the analysis and interpretation of data, and the methods that you use for gas and electricity in buildings and processes, and yes, water as well. Translate them straight into the transport field. You can do exactly the same kind of analysis. And fascinating it is too, as well, sometimes, to be able to do a Q-sum analysis of an articulated lorry and then go to its owner and say, what happened on the 14th of March last year? Was this vehicle assigned to a new driver, or what, or is it starting to do a different type of duty cycle because its performance has radically changed? And it looks like the MPG, the running MPG figure is the same, but it's spending more fuel idling than it did before. And that's just desktop analysis using the same old tools that we were using in the 1980s for college buildings heating.
Exactly. So I think we've spoken about this before. You're still involved with legislation. You do a little bit of ESOS work yourself.
Not a lot. Most of what I do in ESOS has been to act as the appointed lead assessor for somebody working within an industry where they are known. So I've done a lot in the metalworking industry, for example, and it's through a trade association who have their own retained energy expert who is not himself a registered lead assessor. So we do a double act. I go to the kickoff meeting, make sure everybody knows what's supposed to happen and who's meant to do it and by when. Look over the consultant's shoulder, do a mid-project review of where his draft report is going. Yes, okay, in a couple of cases, I've dived in and done the fleet energy review, which he hasn't felt competent to do. So yeah, working with people, I've done a couple of solo flights as well, mainly rescuing people that have found themselves gone past the deadline, not realizing they were caught within the scope of the scheme. I expect you've had a few yourself who's come to the party somewhat late.
You're still working on the phase 2 one, believe it or not.
No, I entirely believe it. Yeah.
ISO 50001, Vilnis.
Yes.
Yeah. What's your views on ISO 50001?
They're mixed, of course. Most of my views on things. I was involved in the drafting of it. I was deeply involved in the drafting of its European standard predecessor, EN 16001. Yeah. When I was active as an energy manager, it was a world of the subversive hero. So one of my, again, big influences in my life was a chap called John Willoughby, who was the energy manager at the Technical College in Gloucester, which was technically on my patch, but I mean, he was a far better energy manager than I was, but he was a total subversive. He and there's another one who's retired since, David Pybus from Cleveland Potash. These are people who got things done in spite of top management. Yeah. They were such enthusiasts. The trouble was, when they moved on, or were moved on, the work they did disappeared with them. There was no institutional memory of what they've been doing. And these management system standards get around that problem by creating a framework for systematic energy management where it becomes immediately apparent if the prime mover goes missing. And therefore, it should give you a lot of continuity in the way your energy management proceeds. The downside to me is that the management systems juggernaut, British standards and the International Standards Organization, for example, and the European Standards Organization, claim that standards are at the leading edge. They're not. That's the problem. An international standard, by definition, is the best that you can get away with by consensus. And if you've got a committee with 75 people from different nationalities sitting in a big room trying to draft a document which few, if any of them, disagree with, and that's the criterion, you end up with institutionalized mediocrity. So that's why I have mixed feelings. In the right hands, a very powerful weapon, but unfortunately, there is too much scope, I think, for tokenism and box ticking if that's the way people choose to go. We could fill a whole interview with my views on international standards, but I don't think we want to do that.
My view on it personally is that there's just not enough take up on it. I just don't understand why there isn't more take up on it. I was trained to do that in 2017, just after ESOS phase 1. I honestly believe that was the right direction to go. For people to give them the option, either do an ESOS or do complete a ISO 50001 study. And I thought that's it. We need to learn that. I need to be educated in that area. But I've never, ever been approached on ISO 50001.
Okay, I'm not entirely surprised. I think if you were working in Germany, you would have been overwhelmed because there you get a tax break. So if you've...
Exactly. Different countries have applied it differently. And the German government have applied tax breaks to benefit organisations, which I think is a very good way of approaching it.
Yeah. That meeting with 75 people in it, that's in my mind when I told that story, is in Rio de Janeiro. And in the room, unknown to me, is a young engineer from Chile who works for the Chilean Energy Efficiency Agency. And it is a few years later I get a phone call from him to say, and we hadn't met at that stage at all. I had no idea of his existence. And he said, we've been working on getting an energy management program going nationally in Chile, and we've based it on ISO 50001. And so that's what people have to do. What you need to understand, Paul, is that in Chile, the culture is if there's a standard for it, that's what you do. Okay, that's just a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And he said, anyway, we hit this problem using energy performance indicators, and a couple of my industrial guinea pigs have discovered that they don't really work. And he said, so what? I said to them, he said, I was in a meeting a couple of years ago, and an English guy told us this would happen. I'll phone him and see if he can help us. And out of that, I got 4 really delightful missions to Chile to help their national energy management program implement ISO 50001, but using proper principles of monitoring and targeting and QSUM analysis and proper performance indicators, not the silly ones that are sort of embedded in most people's minds. So ISO 50001 has been good to me in that sense.
Well, that's a great story. So, Vilnis, it's really great having you with us today, and you've given a lot to the industry. Is there something that you can give back to the industry today for our listeners?
Yeah, I think there's one key point really, and it's to do with energy monitoring and targeting, which you know is my great passion, and it's particularly relating to things like why we need degree day statistics or production data and so forth. And what I'm going to do is, I don't know what to do. I'm going to express it through the medium of dance. No, I'm sorry, through the medium of verse.
Please don't sing to us. Please don't sing.
I haven't thought of a tune, and I haven't got my ukulele here either. Right. So it got a little ditty, and it goes like this: when you purchase energy, you use it for a reason, in quantities determined by activity and season. You need a way of proving the amount you used was fair. If you only read your meters, you're not even halfway there.
Absolutely amazing, Vilnis.
Well, that's very kind of you.
Where did that come from?
That came from my warped imagination.
That is brilliant. I love it. I really do love it. Vilnis, you're an amazing character. You've done so much, I think, for me in my industry. I've created some really good reports around your data. This is a very memorable podcast for me. I'm honoured to have you on our show today. So thank you very much.
Well, I'm flattered. You're too kind. I just want to say that everything that I've done, I owe to certain individuals I can remember throughout my career. I've mentioned some of them already, like Colin Ashford, the energy manager at Hackney, who introduced me to computers. John Willoughby at Gloucestershire, who was a fantastic, subversive, knowledgeable energy manager, and who founded Energy in Buildings as a magazine as well, among other things.
Yeah.
Peter Harris, who introduced me to QSUM analysis. Basically, everything I did from that day onwards was based on what he taught me. And then a couple of guys, Roger Hawes and John Mulholland. You know John, I think.
Yeah, I know John, yes.
Both Roger and John bailed me out when I'd managed to go bust and I needed a job. They gave me a job just for the asking, and trusted and defended me, even though I'm an awkward to work with. And also, I have to acknowledge my brother-in-law, Joe O'Keefe, who came to work with me as a mature intern in the 1990s, 95 or thereabouts, I think it was. I didn't have anything particularly for him to do, but he wanted to learn about computers because he was basically flogging wine and wanted to get out of managing wine shops. So I said, okay, Joe, sit in the corner, you can make the coffee, watch what I do with the computer and have a bit of a tinker around. And Joe set up the Vesma.com website, and the rest is history.
Brilliant.
Thanks so much for the opportunity to talk to you, Paul.
To be honest, we'll invite you back again soon, I'm sure, because there's other sides of your story we want to hear. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. And stay safe, you and your family.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening today, and thank you to my special guest. And if you want to know more about managing your third largest expense, please go to our website on b2benergy.co.uk. That leaves me with one more thing to say. Be safe.